Hey guys, happy Sunday. I'm just doing a quick video on a couple of the things I'm noticing in our coursework. I've titled this The Usefulness of IEE, and you can see how beautiful my graphics are. Because I may be seeing a third of the class use this sometimes, the IEE structure, and it means that our answers are lacking some clarity. And we've got lots of good ideas and we're trying to smush them all into the answer without much structure. So this video is going to be focusing on a couple of the coursework questions, but it's really going to be looking at, moving forward, how do we use this IEE structure more effectively? Okay, so let's go through and decode this question. We know that distinguish means the difference between, so show the difference. If I'm distinguishing between Mr. Truan and Mr. Ridley, I might say Mr. Truan's very handsome, while Mr. Ridley has a face that looks like a squash mango. Okay, so that's one difference that I've shown between the two. Second difference I might highlight would be another difference between the two is that Mr. Truan tells really funny jokes that his whole class laughs at, while Mr. Ridley tells very bad jokes. So you see, I've distinguished between Mr. Truan and Mr. Ridley. I'd want to go into more depth, obviously. Okay, great. So I've looked at the instructional term, which is distinguish, and I've said it's show the difference. Let's move on to the content words now. So I want criminal jurisdiction. So I'm not going to talk about civil law at all. Interesting as well that it doesn't tell me, it doesn't specify original or appellate. So that's a little hint that I could probably talk about both. So whenever I see this word jurisdiction, I know that it's either talking about the original or appellate jurisdiction of the Magistrates Court and the Supreme Court Trial Division for 4 marks. So in terms of the limiting words, I guess it's limited by the fact that I'm only going to talk about the Magistrates Court and I'm only going to talk about the Supreme Court Trial Division. If I get a jurisdiction question about the Magistrates Court, first thing I need to identify is that they deal with summary offences. They also deal with indictable offences heard or tried summarily, IOTS. There are 2 possible points. That's the original jurisdiction. The Supreme Court, serious indictable offences such as murder. The appellate jurisdiction, I know that Magistrates Court has no appellate jurisdiction. Where am I appealing from? Yeah, I've got to be appealing from somewhere. Magistrates Court is right at the bottom. Supreme Court Trial Division does have appellate jurisdiction that I can look at in just a minute. Now, when I go to my mark allocation, if it's 4 marks, an easy way to divide this up, and it's a distinguish, I like to say, all right, it's 4 marks, I'm going to look at 2 differences, and it'll be 2 marks per difference. Okay? Don't underestimate the importance of decoding the question. I bang on about it all the time, but it matters. Okay, so where do I start? If I've got 2 differences, the easiest way for me to go through and explain each of those differences is to use IEE. Okay. So one difference is the original jurisdiction. Even better, I can say the original criminal jurisdiction. Okay, so I've set up my answer now, and I'm going to go through and explain. Okay. The Magistrates Court hears, and like we said before, summary offences and indictable offences heard summarily, whereas, I've got my comparative language in here, whereas, I could say in contrast, the Supreme Court Trial Division hears serious indictable offences. Okay. If I want to then elaborate, I could use an example. For example, the Magistrates Court would hear a case in theft, whereas the Supreme Court would hear a murder case. I could use an example. Alternatively, I could say why this is. So I'd say this is because the Magistrates Court is at the bottom of the court hierarchy, whereas the Supreme Court is towards the top. Okay, so that's my 2 marks. Okay, I've got 1 mark here, 1 mark here. I've still got 2 marks to go, so let's not stop there. All right, easy. I'm just going to roll through my IEE structure again. Okay, here we go. Another difference is the appellate jurisdiction. Okay, so again, I've got 2 clear differences that I'm explaining to get my marks. The Magistrate Court does not have an appellate jurisdiction, whereas the Supreme Court Trial Division, again, we're not talking about the Supreme Court Court of Appeal, Trial Division, hears appeals on a point of law from the Magistrates Court. So like I was saying, here's appeals on points of law from Magistrates Court. Okay, point of elaboration there could again be linking that back to their place in the court hierarchy. The Supreme Court Trial Division hears appeals on a point of law from the Magistrates Court because they are a superior court in the court hierarchy. Okay, so I'm just again linking that back to the overall court hierarchy. So as you can see, I've made my answer so much easier just by using IEE. Okay, when this becomes automatic, so I'm just going, one difference is the original criminal jurisdiction of the 2 courts. The Magistrate Court hears summary offences and indictable offences heard summarily, whereas the Supreme Court Trial Division hears serious indictable offences. For example, the Magistrate Court hears theft, whereas the Supreme Court hears murder cases. Bang. There's my 2 marks. It's really easy. I don't have to think too much about how I'm wording my answer. I'm just going 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's move on to another example. Explain 2 factors the judge took into account in sentencing. All right. So I know explain means to make clear using multiple points of detail. 2 factors. All right, so let's go here. I've done my instructional term. It's got a content word, factors that the judge takes into account in sentencing. So I know that of those, I'm going to have 4 possible choices. So we could look at aggravating factors, mitigating factors, victim impact statement, and guilty plea. However, as I go through here, I'm going to go now to my limiting word, 2. So it means I'm going to choose 2. So I might look at, all right, aggravating factors and the guilty plea, 4 marks. So again, I know here is going to be 2 marks, here is going to be 2 marks. Move along. I'm going to identify, so same thing as I did in my last answer. Now obviously I'm applying to DPP and Singh. 1 factor the judge took into account in sentencing in DPP and Singh was aggravating factors. Okay. I'm going to just quickly explain what aggravating factors are. Aggravating factors are those factors which increase the culpability, therefore, or thus, increasing the severity of the sentence. Really important that I include both of these parts. One, that it increases culpability, so the extent to which the person is responsible for their crime. Then what's the impact on the sentence? Well, it increases the severity of the sentence. And then I'm going to elaborate. When I elaborate here, I could also change that to the example. I'm going to here apply to DPP and Sing. I know I have to do that in this question. So in DPP and Sing, aggravating factors taken into account by the judge include the fact that he was driving without a license, driving on a learner's permit. Okay, and we go through and do the same thing. Another factor is the guilty plea. Judges take into account the guilty plea because it saves the court's time and it shows remorse. In DPP and Sing, the offender pled guilty. So when we're talking about sentencing, we're saying the offender because they've already been found guilty. The offender pled guilty at the earliest instance. I should change that, at the earliest opportunity. Okay. Thus, showing remorse. You could also change that. It might be better if we said thus, reducing his sentence. Again, the more you can remove this, mental legwork, we should say, in answering a question. If I just know, I set out my answer, IEE, it removes a lot of that planning burden on you. It just means you say, all right, well, I'm going to first talk about one factor. I'm going to explain what that is. I'm going to elaborate or apply to the scenario. If it is a 4 marker, I know that in my explain, I get a mark here. My elaborate, I get a mark here again. And that's how I get to my 4 out of 4. Right, it's an explain question, so I'm not getting marks just for identifying aggravating factors as a relevant factor taken into account by the judge. It's the extent to which I explain and elaborate on that. Okay, so I've just mapped out how to answer a couple of those coursework questions. The most important lesson I want you to take away is using IEE. Students doing really well in our class are using this scaffold to help their answers. All right, so there you go.